Hey, welcome to Echo Conversations. Let's talk personal productivity. I know that a lot of leaders, ministry leaders, nonprofit leaders, leaders of teams, small, medium, large teams are watching this video. And I want to talk about productivity. I always want to be more productive. I'm looking for tools, tech, all the tips of the trade. That's a lot of T's for productivity. And so I wanted to bring on a friend and a highly productive person.
That's a tall order.
No pressure.
Yeah.
But this is Rob Bettis, and we've known each other for, dude, it's been over a decade.
It's been a while.
We're getting old, man.
We are.
I want to share this story because I have shared this concept with several people. I've had a chance to speak in front of a few groups that I have shared this, and I don't think I've ever talked to you about this. And I don't. Okay, so here's what I do know is that in college, we went to college together.
Yep.
In college, you were speaking, I think, to a small group of us, and you mentioned this concept of if you want to get to know an industry, or you want to learn a new trade or something. I think it was about talking to college kids about, which you were one at the time.
Yep.
About getting a job, like right out of college or something. And you said this thing, it stuck with me. If you want to get to know something in industry or something, subscribe to 3 magazines in that industry. Okay, so I think golf was maybe an example.
Yeah.
And so like, I've never played golf. I want to get into golf, and I don't want to seem like a total amateur.
Yeah.
So what do? I need to subscribe to 3 magazines, and and basically what happens when you do that is that you start learning the language. So you take on the vernacular of a golf player. You you read the expert opinions, and then you actually start to create your own opinions based on that. You can reference the leaders in the industry, all these things.
Yeah.
Do you remember giving this advice?
I do. You didn't tell me the story you're going to say before we started this, and I'm sitting here thinking that's probably the least embarrassing example.
The least embarrassing story I may have.
I was envisioning it being much worse. So
thank you
for being kind.
That's the next video. So what I find hilarious about this is magazines have almost all but died.
Sure.
So it ages that advice, but that advice still stands, which is why I still 6 months ago, I stood in front of a group of seniors.
Yeah.
Which I think we were in the same series of speakers.
We did.
And I was trying to talk to them about casting a vision for their future and calling. And I talked about this. Nice. I gave them this exact, and I promoted you for, I think you spoke the next week after me, but yeah, man, I've been telling people about this for a decade now, man.
That's awesome.
Anytime I get the chance, and it still holds true. So we talk about blogs now and podcasts. So I think it still holds up. It's great advice. And the reason I think this is relevant is because we talk to a lot of ministries about this concept of a attention dashboard.
Yeah.
Which is basically keeping what do you have in front of you? If you look at like a dashboard of an airplane or a dashboard of a car, what's the things that you keep your attention on in front of you?
I love that.
And I think some of that, I think it lends itself to this conversation about what are you paying attention to? What tools are you using? But I don't want to put words in your mouth. You're going to be the productivity expert here. Sure. I do not claim this.
Sure.
So yeah, I think this lends itself to talk about how have you in your life you structure being disciplined with getting work done, making a plan, even leadership and the different ways that you've led in business, nonprofit, consulting.
Yeah.
So what systems are you creating around yourself that we can learn from?
Yeah, for me, I'm a tech nerd, right? And so when I think about time management, I often think about task management as kind of a building block of that. Okay. And when I think about task management, I think about how computers work. It's a stretch. Follow me.
No, I'll go with it. Yeah.
So if you've ever purchased a computer before and you know anything about the specs of a computer, you know that two kind of elements that you often are looking at are the amount of RAM a computer has and the amount of hard drive space a computer has. Hard drive space stores the files. RAM is actually short for random access memory. So the way a computer works when you're doing work on it is if you open a file, your computer goes and gets that file from the hard drive and puts it into RAM. And while you're working on it, it stays in RAM. When you're done, you save, you close, back to the hard drive, right? And so I think one of the challenges that we face as leaders is figuring out how to optimize the amount of stuff we have in RAM versus the amount of stuff we have in hard drive. So to give a different analogy, a little less technical, like how many tabs do you have open in your browser right now?
There you go.
Right? Like, and there's a reason your computer starts slowing down when you have a million tabs open, because it's doing a million things at one time. Right. And so I think if we can kind of hone in on the amount of stuff we have in RAM, the amount of tabs we have open, I think that it lends itself to us being able to focus greater on what we are doing, which leads to a higher quality output and a greater like attention to detail, a greater result. And so to me, when I think about task management, time management, it's all about putting systems in place that allow me to do fewer things well, fewer things at a higher level of quality at a time. I mean, that doesn't mean that we have fewer tasks to do. That's a harder problem to solve, but it does lend itself to how we process the things that are on our plate. Yeah,
and gosh, that's super important. Ministry leaders that we talk to are trying to do so much. Such a limited amount of budget and a limited amount of resources, and that includes people resources, the teams that we have. Everybody's trying to do so much, and talk about deep and wide, like. Yeah. If you go so wide, you can only go so deep in each one. And then vice versa, if you're able to minimize how many things you're doing, you may be able to go deeper and create like the quality that you're talking about.
I think one of the challenges too, especially for ministry leaders, is that we're also dealing with other people, right? Like it's not just filing reports or doing some sort of, administrative task, although sometimes that's part of it. But often the work we're doing is directly related to other individuals. And if you're the type of person who's dedicated your life to ministry, you're the type of person that cares about those individuals. And so you can fall into a rhythm of trying to have a million tabs open, and because you're wanting to give your best self to so many different directions. And so the challenge this then becomes just how do we create the systems that allow us to for those personal interactions to be more quality.
Yeah. So systems, and so let's talk about like some of the tech and the systems around what you do.
Sure.
But let's also talk about how you decide what's important.
Yeah.
So which one would you like to tackle first?
I think one of the big challenges, and we'll just kind of go through this in the natural progression, is a way to capture tasks. Yeah. Like for me, I don't know about you, I almost never think of the stuff that I've forgotten to do when I'm at my desk at my computer. Like it's almost always, mowing the yard or the proverbial in the shower kind of thing, right? When all of a sudden your mind slows down enough for you to remember all the things that you've forgotten to remember previously. So I think having some sort of outlet to put those down into some system is essential. And when we talk about that system, it doesn't have to be complex. I mean, it can be pen and paper, right? Like there are certainly, pen and paper, one end of the spectrum, there are super sophisticated task management apps at the other end of the spectrum. And, it's a personal preference, how you operate kind of thing that usually decides which is best for an individual. But if you have a mechanism to capture all of those things and they come to mind, then it's creating a system in how to process.
Okay. So for you, I mean, most of our audience is they're watching it on a computer or a device of some kind. So what do you find? What's a good tool?
Yeah, I use an app. It's not that works on iPhone and Apple products. It's called Things. It's been around for a long time Mac developer group that created it. It's probably somewhere in the middle. It's not as a super sophisticated task management app. It's clean and simple interface. It's got some of the features I like. The most personal, the one that I like the most that's kind of random is the ability to put start and end dates. That helps me a lot, but that's not
everybody loves a deadline, man.
Yeah.
I mean, without deadlines.
And I have plenty of deadlines. What I often struggle with is how to prioritize and like being able to put a start date in there and say, okay, I'm doing these things this week, I'm doing these things next week, allows me to not this week have to be looking at 3 or 4 weeks worth of stuff I have to do and get super anxious about it, but allows me to kind of say like, hey, that's a next week thing. And I can take it out of RAM. I can put it in the hard drive and worry about it next week. So I think once you have kind of a way of capturing those tasks and organizing them, It then becomes a matter of how you want to go about processing them.
Okay.
I think for some people, it's like, hey, before I leave the office today, I'm going to look at my list on my piece of paper, and I'm going to pick 3 things to do tomorrow. And I'm going to do that with a clear mind. I'm going to do that knowing the priorities that of the day, and I'm, if I do nothing else, I'm going to get these three things done tomorrow. Oftentimes it's really helpful to do that with the mindset of what's on my calendar tomorrow, to be realistic. So much of this, and the reason it's so hard is because there's so many conflicting priorities, and there's also this need to be honest with yourself about what your limitations and your capabilities are. And so I think just starting small, the small list is big. If you work in an office with a lot of people, sometimes you leave and you think, gosh, what did I get done today?
Right.
And so if you can start saying, I got these 3 things done today, it's progress.
Yeah, I've heard people that have talked about like a sticky note or a index card.
Yep.
You've heard that, like
Yep.
write the 3 things down on the index card, and they keep it. That's why it's a small piece of paper. Keep it small. That way you're not able to put like 100 million things
Right.
in
Yeah.
one day. But if you can just accomplish the index card today,
Yep.
and you did your task, and it sounds like 3 things, but it's like, no, seriously, if you're accomplishing the 3 things on your card,
Yeah.
you're doing awesome.
You're making progress.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's super helpful. And I think in a lot of, I myself am in this category, you may be too. If you're a people pleaser kind of person, you start just naturally promising more than you can deliver on.
Right.
And I think having the 3 thing kind of approach throttles that a little bit. And it says like, hey, I promise I can do that for you, but it's going to be 2 days from now, not tomorrow. And like oftentimes that's not that big a deal, sometimes it is, but most of the time it's not. And so just getting in the habit of giving yourself that margin of saying like, I know tomorrow's spoken for, but the next day is yours, starts to, enrich the quality of life and the level of stress you're carrying.
I would imagine most ministry leaders feel like they live have you heard the phrase "death by good intentions"?
Yeah.
I mean, there's the road to hell is paved in good intentions. Is that right?
Okay.
Something like
Sure.
that. I don't know. It sounds like something some country country phrase. Anyway,
Yeah.
What's next? Let's move on from that.
Yeah. I think one other layer of this is when you've got the list, and oftentimes the list is longer than the capacity, right? So it does kind of create a way of scheduling out into the future, is just kind of taking a second look at that list and evaluating which of those things. I don't know about you. I don't know what your system is, but for me, if I have a task on my list for very long, oftentimes a few days later I'll look at it and I won't even remember why that was something that needed to be done.
Oh, sure.
It's just like, it turns out that wasn't nearly as important as I thought it was. So having kind of a mechanism to review those tasks and look at them through fresh eyes is really helpful. I don't know if you're familiar with the Eisenhower Matrix.
Just recently, actually.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
Thanks to my buddy Rob.
Yeah, that's something I use that's beneficial. And if you're not familiar, it'll probably look familiar now that we're looking at it. But it's the urgent, not urgent, important, not important metric. And so this is just a quick and dirty kind of way of looking at things on your list and assessing. Is this something that's important? Is it something that's urgent? And in the combination of those 2 factors means a lot to how you might interact with that task.
Yeah. Well, weatherman this for us real quick.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Take us through it.
There's a cold front. No, it's so if something's urgent and something's important, it needs to be done. Not rocket science.
Do it.
If something is important but not urgent, it needs to be scheduled.
Okay.
What I find happens to me a lot and to a lot of leaders is that there's those tasks, the things that are important but not urgent, are constantly battling things that are urgent but not important for my attention each day.
Okay.
And if I'm not careful, if I don't defend myself against the things that are not important but urgent, it eats up all of my capacity to do the important long-term things. And so that it requires some protection there. So the Eisenhower Matrix would suggest that the things that are urgent but not important be delegated to someone else. Yep. And I think that's great. If it's a small team, that maybe is more challenging. But if you've got a staff that can help you with that, that's awesome. And then the things that aren't urgent or are not important, as we alluded to earlier, sometimes you kind of get those things and look at them through fresh eyes and think, this doesn't even need to be on my list at all.
Yeah, I like how it says right here, delete. Just get it off your list.
Yep.
That's right.
Yep. So I think filtering your list of tasks through that, and by virtue of having kind of a system to process them, can help a lot, and it can help limit that list, so you don't get bogged down on a list of things to do.
Sure. Well, I don't want to belabor the point, but what else do you have? I mean, anything else? Just a short. I want to keep this video somewhat short.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think that's a big thing for a lot of people, and the thing I would encourage for anyone kind of that's just getting started on this or has tried it a few times and failed is just extend yourself a lot of grace. Like, it's a new way of processing. Good. It's a new way of organizing your life. And if you've got habits that do not lend themselves to this kind of structure or this kind of organization, it's gonna take a minute. Like, it's gonna be a while for you to kind of create those new routines and new habits, and that's okay. Like, but it also doesn't give you an excuse to not try. You know, and so I think it gives it's more of an effort to start working and taking baby steps in a better direction, so that you can make sure that the things that are most important to you and the most important things to your ministry are getting done.
Excellent. Baby steps.
There it is.
Well, I hope that you feel more productive after this. Take a second, back up the video, look at the Eisenhower Matrix, the Eisenhower Matrix, and lay the things on your list. Lay that on top of that as a template, and don't be afraid to delete some things. Again, ministry leaders are taking on so much. Learn what you need to delegate, and then actually take the time to make the time to schedule those things that can be scheduled. So again, we just want to add value for you guys. Check out robbettis.com for more tips and tricks. And he's got a podcast. I mean, he's doing all sorts of stuff. Check out his stuff. And again, thanks for watching this video. If you found this video helpful, share it with a friend. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure you hit that bell so you're notified for all of our future releases. Also, find and like us on Facebook. And we have a bunch of free resources for you at echoglobal.org/resources.